Hey guys, so some of you may own a vehicle that you've owned for a while, and maybe you're yet to understand all the different buttons that are in your car. And that's fine. Of course, it's not every day that you use every single button in your car. That just wouldn't make sense, and that would be unreasonable, of course. But for those of you who are curious, I'd like to take this time to explain to you what some of the buttons in your car actually do. Just as a quick disclaimer, not every car uses the same symbols or buttons, but generally speaking, they're pretty similar. All the symbols are pretty universal. So all the buttons that you have in your car should be, for the most part, similar to what I have here in my car. So let's get this video started. Moving on to this button that says Start Stop Engine. A lot of people are misguided into believing that this actually starts and stops the engine, but believe it or not, this actually is, if you've ever heard of the function called Auto Stop Start, where your car's engine will actually shut off when you come to a complete standstill, this is the button that actually activates and deactivates that. Not to be confused with the actual engine start function that I explained earlier, but this is just for the automatic stop start that you'd use to save gas. These two little buttons here that look like fans are actually not fans at all. These three buttons actually, what they do is they control the underwater propeller. So when your car is underwater and you have no choice, and you can't break out using the button that I mentioned earlier to crack the windshield, what you can do is use these buttons to control your propeller speed. So the one on the right, the bigger one, is to increase the speed. The one in the middle, the smaller one, is to decrease the speed. And the one on the left that says off, well, it's pretty obvious, to turn off the propeller. Now this button here that has a little curved arrow in the car just above the portal button. If you're in an accident and you want to undo the accident, that's what you actually do. You can reset your car that way. Unfortunately, you can only do it once. You can see that in my car there's a little tab for a light to come on. There it is. If that light is on, that means you've already used the reset button once, and that means that you can't do it again, so you should probably drive more carefully. This little white and red triangle, it's actually a pretty big button. This button is actually kind of important. What this does is it actually opens up a portal in front of your car as you're traveling. If you're in a dire situation and you know you can't stop in time and you're going to hit someone no matter what, then in that case you want to press that button, and then it'll actually open up a portal in front of you. And then you'll find yourself transported to another dimension. Now, the risk with using this button is that yes, you will get out of an accident, and of course, your insurance rates won't be affected. However, you'll find yourself in a different dimension, and there's no telling which one it is because it's kind of random. You can't really choose which dimension you travel to. But yeah, if you're in a very, very dire situation, that's the only time that you should really use this button. Okay, moving on to some more functions. This button here, pretty simple, A/C. If you're a fan of rock music, you'll definitely recognize this one. It's kind of funny that pretty much every single car on the road today has this setting, because they were actually endorsed by the band ACDC, of course. And the reason why it's only half the name is because ACDC had a wild splitting. Only 2 members of the band agreed to putting this button inside into every car that comes out of the factory. So if you're ever feeling like a boss and you need some high energy rock music going on in the background just to boost that feeling, you can press that button and then an ACDC song will play. But of course, there'll only be half the members from the band playing the song. Pretty cool button there. Every car has it, and yeah, it's a pretty fun one too. This one on the right is actually kind of funny because there's an error regarding this, which is obviously the spelling. A lot of people see this word and they think dual as in 2 different things or 2 sides of one thing. But what it was originally actually meant to be was dual with an E instead of an A. And what you do is if you're ever in a moment of road rage and someone else is outside your car as well, and if they actually express their desire to fight you, what you want to do is press that button, and what it does is it actually sets up a boxing ring right in front of your car, and then your car becomes the guy in your corner kind of, and then you and the other road ragey can duel it out in the boxing ring. That one's kind of controversial. A lot of people don't seem to like that function. I personally do disagree with it as well. I personally think we should get rid of this function and actually use this button for something like split 2-zone climate control. So this little grouping of words here, passenger airbag off and passenger airbag on, these aren't actually buttons that you can control. You can actually input settings into your car's computer of passengers that you do and don't like. So what that'll do is once the car senses that one of those people have entered your car, depending on whether you like them or not, it'll actually light up off or on depending on what input you have them in your system. Again, this is kind of controversial because it is regarding people's safety. And again, I personally feel like that is a function that we shouldn't have in cars. Okay, so moving on down here to this button right here. Okay, so this is another setting that I don't really use in my car. And there's another button on the right for the passenger, of course, but they both have the same function. And what they do is actually, if you're in your car, if you feel like cooking a meal, the car actually comes with a pot with a long handle, of course, that you can grab from up high. So the way it cooks food is it'll actually heat up your engine to about 500 degrees, and your hood becomes sort of your stovetop, and then you can just put the pot full of whatever you want, soup or water or whatever it is. You can just set that down on the hood. It'll actually boil the pot within about 5 minutes. Now, unfortunately, as a side effect, this does melt your paint and your clear coat, which is why I personally don't use this setting. I don't know much about bodywork and car paint, but I assume that it would be pretty expensive to fix. So you'd probably never see me use this button, but some people might, and that's fine. Of course, not everybody wants paint on their hood. If you're ever in a pinch and if you're dependent on your car for survival, then you can use it as a burner and make some soup with it. And now moving to the buttons that are just on top overhead here. So most of these you wouldn't use actually in if you're in the northern hemisphere. So these buttons are mostly just used in the Australian market. You can see a little diagram there of the sunrise or sunset. Obviously it's upside down because again you'd only use it in Australia. Pretty useful if you get annoyed by the light being constantly in your eyes, and of course, like I said, this is only for Australians, unfortunately. This button right here is international, so you and I could use it. Just as the Red Bull slogan states, when you press that button, it gives you wings. Now, this is a button that you'd use if you're, say, on like a really terribly if you're on like a really terribly, let me try and say that again. If you're on a really terribly paved road and you don't want to drive over it, what it actually does is it gives you wings, not big enough to let you fly for extended periods, but just enough to let you float over those big bumps. The downside is you have to be going a speed of approximately 200 kilometers per hour or faster, because that is the speed at which there's enough lift generated to lift your car up off the ground. So on most roads, you probably can't use it. In fact, I believe the only road you can use that on is the Autobahn, which is in fact immaculately paved. Therefore, this button is kind of useless. So this one on the bottom here, obviously it says snow. This is what you'd use actually if you don't want to shovel your driveway or plow your driveway out with all the snow that's on it. It actually activates a little snowblower attachment just under your front bumper. And as you're wading through the snow, it actually blows the snow away, and it'll actually shoot it out of your exhaust behind you. You don't have to worry about snow being in front of you anymore, and you'll just have to shovel it all up later behind you. This little dial here is pretty fun. Now, I wouldn't recommend using this one on the road, actually. What it does is it's actually kind of a TV remote. If you didn't know, every car that has a screen can actually play TV. Of course, you'll need a kind of like a TV streaming subscription service. This is the remote that you can use to control it. If you push it down like this, it'll actually show you what's called normal TV shows. So stuff like dramas, cartoons, anything that's kind of character-based or story-based, that's your sort of normal TV shows. On the left, you can see there it says Eco, and if you turn the dial to the left, it'll actually bring up shows about nature and stuff like that, like nature documentaries, which is why it says Eco, which is short for ecosystem. So you can watch stuff like National Geographic, Animal Planet. I personally watched the entire Animal Planet series on my screen there, so that was pretty fun. A lot of good shows on that one. The one on the right, obviously self-explanatory, that's the sports channel. Now there's two different types of sports channels that you can watch. So you can see a little S there, and beside it the little S plus. So the first one, the S, those would kind of be your calm down sort of sports, like golf, curling, water polo, cricket, pretty much any kind of like non-aggressive sport. The Sport S Plus channel. On that channel, you'd have stuff like American football, hockey, motorsport. So I like to watch that channel too. Sometimes they'll actually show basketball games depending on which team is playing that night. Let's Go Raptors. So yeah, this is a pretty versatile little remote system they got going here. Okay guys, so moving on to the last set of buttons here. This is what I like to call the night out suite of buttons, because here you can clearly see the one on the right there says home and the one on the left says menu. And what you'd use these for is, let's say you're going out on a date night, or if you're just going out with your family or your friends and you don't know which restaurant you want to go to, what you can actually do is press the menu button. Using those little arrow buttons, you can actually scroll through the different menus for each restaurant, and you can figure out what you want to eat that way. After you've had your dinner and gone out and done whatever, when you press the home button, it actually brings up the addresses of everyone who's in your car. So let's say your date or your parents or your friends. All their home addresses will show up in the screen, and then it'll direct you there. Of course, beforehand you need to input their home addresses so that the car can know which ones to put in. But the car will sense who out of the list is in your car and will show you the most efficient route to drop all of them back home. So that's been it for my little button guide. Hopefully this taught you a thing or two about the functions in your car. Of course, I didn't cover every single button or function in the car, and that's because the ones I didn't cover, obviously every single person knows exactly what they do. And of course I just left those out of the video so that I wouldn't waste your time. So that does it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Alright, see you later, guys.